A single line on a map once started a war that lasted 100 years. We are exploring 27 epic maps that sparked power struggles and adventures across continents. And by the end, you will never look at a simple map the same way again. We will uncover how a chart drawn in secret could smuggle a continent's wealth into an empire's hands, and why a 500-year-old map seems to show a land that should have been undiscovered. What kind of story do you think is hidden in the lines of the world you know? In the hushed halls of a Turkish library in 1929, a lost piece of parchment re-emerged to shake the foundations of history. This was the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral whose work was far more than simple navigation. Its surviving fragment shows the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas with startling detail for its time. But the true mystery lies to the south, where the map appears to chart the continent of Antarctica, a land that would remain hidden beneath ice for 3 more centuries. How could a 16th-century cartographer depict a landmass no one was supposed to know existed? This single question ignited a firestorm among scholars. Some saw it as proof of ancient, advanced seafaring knowledge, perhaps from a civilization whose records are now lost to time. They argue the map accurately shows Antarctica's topography as it would appear without its glacial cover, a feat impossible without either ancient source maps or impossibly advanced technology. Others, however, dismiss this as a compelling but flawed interpretation. They suggest the coastline is merely a misdrawn version of South America, or an artist's speculative guess filling the empty southern oceans. What is undeniable is the map's origin as a weapon of intellectual warfare. Piri Reis himself wrote that he compiled his chart from 20 different sources, including captured Portuguese, Arab, and Indian maps. For the expanding Ottoman Empire, this synthesized knowledge was a strategic asset, a direct challenge to European control over the lucrative sea routes. The map was not just a picture of the world, it was a declaration of imperial ambition. Its rediscovery sparked a different kind of power struggle, pitting conventional historical narratives against tantalizing possibilities. It forces us to ask what other secrets might be hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to resurface. While the Piri Reis map challenges history, another chart was engineered to control it. In the year 1502, a man named Alberto Cantino committed an act of high-stakes espionage that would redraw the world. He was an Italian agent working undercover in Portugal, and his mission was to steal the most valuable secret of the age, the Portuguese royal map. What he smuggled out was the Cantino Planisphere, a breathtakingly detailed chart that was less a navigational aid and more a blueprint for empire. It captured the world at a pivotal moment, showing the coastlines Vasco da Gama had followed to India and Pedro Alvarez Cabral's accidental landing in Brazil. These were state secrets worth more than any shipload of spice, and Cantino delivered them directly to his masters. The map's most powerful feature was a single, vertical line slicing through the Atlantic Ocean. This was the visual representation of the Treaty of Tordesillas, an agreement brokered by the Pope in 1494 that divided all undiscovered lands outside Europe between Spain and Portugal. To the east of the line, Portugal claimed Africa, Asia, and Brazil. To the west, Spain had the rest of the Americas. The Cantino Planisphere made this theoretical division terrifyingly real. It was a cartographic declaration that the entire globe was now a European possession, its peoples and resources there for the taking. This single line on a map ignited centuries of colonial rivalry, a power struggle that would define the modern world. But the Planisphere was more than just a political boundary. It was an instruction manual for exploitation. Its meticulous rendering of West Africa's coastline and the Atlantic islands provided the precise geographical knowledge needed to systematize the transatlantic slave trade. The map did not just show places, it showed opportunities for wealth built on human suffering. It guided ships to trading posts that would become forts, and those forts would become the hubs of a brutal enterprise that displaced millions. This was the dark power of information in the age of discovery. A map could be a weapon, and the Cantino Planisphere was one of the most devastating ever deployed, setting the stage for an even fiercer competition over the riches of the East. But a name can be a powerful act of creation. Just 5 years after the Cantino Planisphere divided the world, a German cartographer working in a small town published a map that would literally put a new continent on the map. Martin Waldseemüller's World Map of 1507 was a work of staggering ambition, a printed wall map composed of 12 separate sheets that presented a vision of the world unlike any before it. And in the sprawling southern landmass across the Atlantic, he inscribed a new word, America. This single label, chosen to honor the explorer and merchant Amerigo Vespucci, was a deliberate act of cartographic branding. Why Vespucci and not the more famous Columbus? Waldseemüller and his colleagues were convinced by Vespucci's published accounts, which argued that these lands were not the outer reaches of Asia, but an entirely new continent, a fourth part of the world. By naming it America, they were endorsing this revolutionary idea and forever cementing Vespucci's legacy in the global imagination. It was a power play that reshaped history, deciding which explorer would be celebrated, and by extension, which nations could claim the intellectual primacy needed to justify their colonial ambitions. But the map's audacity did not stop with a name. Most mysteriously, it depicts the Pacific Ocean as a vast, separate body of water. A full decade before the Spanish explorer Balboa would glimpse it from a peak in Panama, and 14 years before Magellan's fleet would cross it. How could Waldseemüller have known? This suggests he had access to secret Portuguese or Asian knowledge, sources that remain lost to history. The map was a catalyst, shattering the old European worldview of a three-part Earth and replacing it with a truly global perspective. This new vision did not just satisfy curiosity, it fueled a fiercer, more determined race for empire, pushing explorers to seek out the precise contours of this astonishing new world. And as nations scrambled to claim these new lands, the very ground beneath their feet became the ultimate prize, leading to a map that was less about discovery and more about pure, calculated theft. While a German map gave a continent its name, another far older chart dared to turn the entire world upside down. In the year 1154, the Arab geographer Al-Idrisi completed a monumental work for King Roger II of Sicily. This was the Tabula Rogeriana, a map that deliberately positioned south at the top. This was not a simple artistic choice. It was a profound statement rooted in a superior understanding of the world. While Europe was still mired in the Dark Ages, Islamic geography was flourishing, and Al-Idrisi's map was its ultimate expression. For 15 years, he compiled reports from Islamic traders and explorers who had journeyed the Silk Road and sailed the Indian Ocean. His work synthesized this vast knowledge, detailing regions from Scandinavia to Southeast Asia with an accuracy that would not be matched in Europe for centuries. The map showed the sources of the Nile, the sprawling extent of the African continent, and the intricate coastlines of Asia, all based on empirical observation and testimony rather than myth or legend. This masterpiece was born from the unique cultural crossroads of the Norman court in Sicily. Here, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars worked together in a vibrant exchange of ideas. King Roger himself was a patron of this learning, and the map served as a powerful symbol of this enlightened cooperation. It represented a world where power and knowledge were concentrated not in the fledgling kingdoms of Europe, but in the vast, interconnected networks of the Islamic world. The Tabula Rogeriana stands as a brilliant snapshot of a historical pivot point, a moment when one civilization's cartographic mastery far outstripped all others. Yet this very supremacy would soon be challenged. The knowledge it preserved would become the very fuel for the European age of exploration that followed, a shift in global power that began with a single, desperate voyage to find a legendary Christian kingdom. But a map drawn by a sailor tells a more urgent story. Created in the year 1500 by Juan de la Cosa, the man who piloted the Santa Maria on Columbus's first voyage, this was the first European map to show the Americas not as a legend, but as a tangible, mapped reality. It is a raw, first-hand account of discovery, scrawled onto parchment and stained with the salt of the sea. The chart vividly renders the Caribbean islands, the coast of Florida, and the northern bulge of South America, but it is the decorations that reveal its true purpose. Tiny Spanish flags are planted firmly along the coastlines, and illustrations of royal caravels sail proudly through the waters. This was not merely a navigational aid, it was a deed of ownership, a cartographic land grab meant for the eyes of the Spanish crown. For Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, this map was the ultimate report. It transformed Columbus's verbal accounts into a visual strategy, a direct tool for planning the next wave of expeditions. It showed exactly where to send soldiers, where to build settlements, and where to extract the wealth they so desperately sought. The map became the engine of imperial policy, consolidating Spanish control and directly sparking conflicts with the Taino and other indigenous peoples whose homelands were now suddenly and irrevocably claimed by a distant queen. Yet its power also ignited a firestorm across Europe. Rival powers, particularly Portugal, could now see the precise extent of Spanish claims. The Juan de la Cosa map made the abstract New World concrete, and in doing so, it unleashed a torrent of competition, conquest, and tragedy. It was the tangible proof that fueled the ambitions of kings, ambitions that would soon require a formal document to divide the entire globe between them. That theoretical line from the Treaty of Tordesillas demanded a physical reality, a map that could make an imaginary division enforceable across the globe. This cartographic concept, born in 1494, became an obsession for explorers and kings. The treaty itself was a stunning act of presumption, with the Pope drawing a north-south line about 1,000 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Everything to the east belonged to Portugal, everything to the west to Spain. It was a division of the entire non-Christian world, a planet split in two by two rival empires. Yet the agreement was fatally vague, for no one knew where this line actually fell on the other side of the world. This ambiguity turned every voyage into a high-stakes geographical test. The most intense conflict erupted over the Moluccas, the legendary Spice Islands. Were these priceless islands in the Spanish hemisphere or the Portuguese? The question was worth a king's ransom. This single uncertainty propelled Magellan's epic voyage to sail west to reach the east, an attempt to claim the spices for Spain by proving they lay on Spain's side of the line. His journey, which ultimately circumnavigated the globe, was not merely one of exploration, but of legalistic cartography, a desperate mission to draw the most profitable property line in history. The treaty's abstract line thus dictated the routes of ships, the founding of colonies, and the fate of millions. It demonstrates a profound and disturbing truth, that a line on a map, even one that no one can see, can become more powerful than the landscapes it divides, a theme of imposed division that would be tragically repeated centuries later with a very different ruler and a very different continent. Yet another map claims to shift the very origins of discovery, a parchment clouded in accusations of brilliant deception. The Vinland map presents a coastline labeled Vinland, a part of North America seemingly drawn in the 15th century, long before Columbus ever set sail. If it were real, this single document would rewrite history, moving the first European contact with the Americas from the Mediterranean powers to the Norse Vikings. It would be the ultimate cartographic trophy, proving the sagas of Leif Erikson were not just stories but mapped reality. The power struggle it ignited, however, was not over land or trade routes but over truth itself. The battle lines were drawn in university halls and scientific laboratories, pitting traditional historians against those championing a revolutionary narrative. For nations, the stakes were immense, a chance to claim foundational bragging rights in the story of the New World, but the map's own physical evidence turned against it. Advanced analysis of its ink revealed traces of a modern 20th century compound, a chemical fingerprint that pointed squarely to an elaborate forgery. The map was likely a masterwork of fakery, created to deceive collectors and rewrite history for profit or fame. This makes the Vinland map's power uniquely paradoxical. Its greatest impact was not in proving a historical fact, but in the epic adventure of unmasking its own lie. It forced a global conversation about evidence, authenticity, and our desire to believe in world-altering discoveries. The map's true legacy is the debate it sparked, a fierce intellectual conflict proving that a chart's influence can be just as profound when it is a magnificent fraud. This tension between genuine discovery and fabricated glory stands in stark contrast to a map whose ambitious claims were terrifyingly real, a chart designed not just to claim a coastline, but to conquer an entire civilization. While European powers were drawing lines to divide the world, a very different kind of map was being used to connect it. Tucked away for centuries in Oxford's Bodleian Library, the Selden map of China was rediscovered in 2008, a stunning artifact from the early 1600s that reveals a world Europeans barely knew. This large, colorful scroll depicts the South China Sea not as a blank space for conquest, but as a vibrant, bustling hub of commerce. Its intricate web of shipping routes connects dozens of ports from Japan to the Indonesian archipelago, with precise navigational directions written directly on the chart. This was a practical tool for Chinese merchants, a guide to the most profitable paths across the water. The map's power lies in what it ignores. There are no imperial flags, no territorial boundaries imposed by distant kings. Power here is measured not by the reach of an empire, but by the flow of silk, porcelain, and spices. It captures a moment just before European dominance, when Chinese commercial and cultural influence created a vast, interconnected Asian world. This was globalization on its own terms, a network so robust that when European ships finally arrived, they had to plug into this existing system rather than simply impose their own. The Selden map challenges the very core of our traditional exploration narratives. It forces us to ask, what does history look like when we stop viewing it solely through a European lens? Here was a sophisticated, trade-driven civilization that saw the sea not as a barrier to be crossed for conquest, but as a highway to be traveled for mutual benefit. Its rediscovery rewrites a chapter of global history, proving that the age of exploration was not a one-sided story of European discovery, but a complex tapestry of many interwoven journeys. This vision of a world linked by commerce, however, would soon be threatened by a map with a far more aggressive purpose, one designed not to facilitate trade, but to monopolize it completely. Commissioned for King Manuel I of Portugal, the Miller Atlas is a breathtaking declaration of global power captured on vellum. Created in 1519, this was not a single map but a collection of lavish charts illustrating a maritime empire that stretched from the coast of Brazil all the way to the spice markets of India. Every detail, from the precisely drawn coastlines to the vivid illustrations of exotic plants, strange animals, and indigenous peoples, was meticulously crafted to serve a dual purpose. It was a functional navigational tool for the king's pilots, but more importantly, it was a piece of state propaganda, a visual inventory of the immense wealth and reach of the Portuguese crown. Here, the entire world seemed to be a Portuguese possession, its riches catalogued for a monarch who styled himself the Lord of the Conquest, Navigation, and Commerce of Ethiopia, Arabia, Persia, and India. This atlas was the key to managing that sprawling domain. Its charts guided the heavily armed fleets that sailed the Carrera da India, the perilous sea route to the east that was both a lifeline of profit and a gauntlet of danger. These ships were engaged in a constant, violent struggle for control of the Indian Ocean, battling Ottoman galleys, Arab dhows, and the growing ambitions of other European rivals. The Miller Atlas was their strategic playbook, a cartographic command center that helped Portugal defend its monopolies on pepper and cloves. It embodies the raw adventure of the age, a time when a single successful voyage could fill the royal treasury, and a single shipwreck could mean financial ruin. This display of maritime dominance, however, leads us to a map that guided a quest not for spices or gold, but for a kingdom built on a legend. The power of a map does not always depend on its accuracy. Nearly 2 centuries after the mysterious Piri Reis chart, a French geographer named Philippe Buach published a map of the Antarctic region that was entirely theoretical. In 1739, with no direct observation to guide him, Buach envisioned a vast southern continent fractured by a frozen inland sea. He pieced this vision together from scattered reports of icebergs and distant ice fields, using his own belief in symmetrical landforms to fill in the blanks. His map was a masterpiece of deduction, a landscape born from logic and rumor rather than exploration. Yet this cartographic hypothesis held immense power. It gave tangible form to the ancient dream of Terra Australis Incognita, the great unknown southern land that had captivated European imaginations for centuries. Buach's lines on parchment transformed a philosophical idea into a geographical goal, a challenge that would drive explorers for the next 100 years. Nations now had a target, a speculative coastline that promised glory and territory to whoever could prove it real. This theoretical map fueled a fierce, international race to the bottom of the world, pushing ships into the treacherous southern oceans on a quest to claim a phantom. It was a stunning demonstration that a compelling idea, even one drawn from thin air, could alter the course of history by inspiring real adventure. The search for this icy continent would become one of exploration's greatest epics, a testament to the enduring power of a map to make the unimaginable seem within reach. And as this cartographic theory gave way to the harsh reality of discovery, it set the stage for a very different kind of map, one that would not imagine a new world, but violently carve up an old one. A single sheet of paper, drawn by a man who had never set foot in America, would dictate the future borders of a nation. The John Mitchell map of 1755 was perhaps the most consequential cartographic work in North American history, a tool of imperial administration that became the birth certificate of the United States. Commissioned by the British government, its purpose was intensely practical: to visualize the sprawling territorial disputes with France that were escalating toward war. Mitchell, a Virginia-born botanist living in London, synthesized reports from colonial governors, fur traders, and soldiers to create a map of stunning, though sometimes speculative, detail. Its most powerful feature was its vivid coloring, which painted the Ohio River Valley with the bold hues of British claims, directly challenging French assertions of control. This was not just a map, it was a legal argument and a casus belli, a visual justification for the conflict we know as the French and Indian War. When that global war ended, the map's role was only beginning. It was spread out on the table during the Treaty of Paris negotiations in 1783, where American diplomats like Benjamin Franklin used its British-centric boundaries to argue for the new nation's western extent. The faint, meandering lines Mitchell had drawn for rivers and mountain ranges became the rigid borders of a republic, stretching from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. The map's influence did not fade with independence. For over a century, it was pulled from the archives again and again, its lines cited in treaties with Spain, France, and Mexico, and even in landmark Supreme Court cases well into the 1900s that determined state boundaries and native land rights. It was a living document, its original imperial purpose forever overwritten by the relentless story of American expansion. This cartographic cornerstone, born from one power struggle and defining the next, stands in stark contrast to a map that did not draw borders, but instead charted the very pathways of conquest. A world of parchment and pigment, drawn not to guide a ship but to save a soul. In England's Hereford Cathedral rests the Mappa Mundi, a sprawling map from the year 1300 that offers a portal into the medieval mind. This is not a chart of lands and seas as they are, but as they were believed to be in the grand design of God. Jerusalem sits at the very center of the circular world, a deliberate declaration that faith, not geography, was the true axis of human existence. The map is a dense tapestry woven from scripture, classical legend, and travelers' tales, where the Garden of Eden shares space with the mythical monopods, a race of men who shaded themselves with a single, giant foot. Here, Alexander the Great's armies march toward the edges of the world, and the monstrous races imprisoned by Gog and Magog wait behind a Caspian mountain wall, their eventual escape a sign of the coming apocalypse. Every strange beast and biblical scene served a single, powerful purpose: to provide a visual Bible for a population that could not read. In an age where the church was the ultimate authority, the Mappa Mundi was a masterful tool of instruction and control. It taught the history of the world from creation to salvation, reinforcing a complete world view where spiritual truth outweighed earthly fact. Its power lay not in guiding travelers across the ocean, but in guiding the faithful through the perils of sin toward eternal life. This magnificent artifact captures a moment when the entire cosmos could be contained within a single, sacred narrative. But this unified vision of the world was about to shatter, giving way to a new age where the quest for gold and glory would challenge the power of the Pope himself, a shift that begins with a map drawn not for a cathedral, but for a king's treasury. While European courts obsessed over their New World claims, a Korean mapmaker was assembling a chart of staggering scope. The Kangnido map of 1402, officially titled the Map of Integrated Lands and Regions of Historical Countries and Capitals, presents a world seen through an entirely different lens. From its vantage point in the Joseon dynasty, this map depicts a vast old world stretching from Korea and Japan all the way to a roughly sketched Europe and a surprisingly recognizable Africa. Its creation was an act of intellectual synthesis, weaving together Chinese, Korean, and even Arab geographical knowledge into a single, coherent vision. This was not a tool for naval conquest, but a diplomatic and scholarly instrument designed to illustrate Korea's sophisticated understanding of its place within a wider cosmos of trade and ideas. The map's power lies in its confident, Asian-centric perspective. Here, China sits at the heart of the civilized world, its borders clearly defined, while the lands of the distant West are compressed and simplified at the edges. This cartographic hierarchy directly challenges the popular narrative that advanced global knowledge was a unique European achievement in the 15th century. The Kangnido map proves that sophisticated cartography was flourishing simultaneously on the other side of the globe, born from a network of overland and maritime Silk Road exchanges that connected continents long before Portuguese caravels arrived. It offers a crucial counterpoint, a reminder that the world was always interconnected and that the drive to map it was a universal human impulse. This expansive Asian worldview, however, would soon become the very prize that European mapmakers desperately sought to capture and control, a pursuit that would lead directly to a chart so influential it would guide Europe's empires toward Asia for the next 3 centuries. Deep within the royal treasury in Lisbon, locked away from all but a chosen few, was the true heart of the Portuguese Empire. This was not a vault of gold or a chest of jewels, but a single master map known as the Padrão Real. Continuously updated by a state-appointed cartographer, this chart was a living secret, its parchment lines redrawn with every new coastline a ship's captain reported. It was the empire's central intelligence, a complete and constantly evolving picture of the route to India, the shape of Brazil, and the trading posts of Africa. To possess this map was to possess the keys to a global commercial network, which is why the penalty for copying it was death. Its power was not in public display, but in absolute control of information. While other nations guessed and speculated, Portuguese navigators sailed with the most accurate charts in existence, giving their tiny kingdom an insurmountable head start in the race for riches. This created a shadow world of cartographic espionage, where the greatest adventure was not in discovering new lands, but in stealing the knowledge of them. Men like Alberto Cantino, who smuggled out the Planisphere we discussed earlier, were not just thieves, they were geopolitical saboteurs. Their daring missions prove that in the 16th century, the most valuable cargo was not spice or silk, but a piece of paper. Padrão Real's legacy is one of paranoid control, a closed system of knowledge designed to maintain a monopoly. This obsession with secrecy would eventually be challenged by a new kind of map, one whose power lay not in being hidden, but in being boldly, publicly, and violently triumphant. Gerardus Mercator solved a sailor's deadliest puzzle with a simple mathematical twist. His world map of 1569 was engineered for one purpose: to let a navigator draw a straight line on the chart and follow that exact compass bearing across the open ocean. This room line technique was a revolutionary gift to any captain daring enough to cross vast, empty seas. But this navigational miracle required a profound sacrifice, a deliberate distortion of the planet's true proportions. To represent the curved surface of the Earth on a flat rectangle, Mercator stretched the latitudes dramatically as they moved away from the equator. The result was a world where Greenland appears larger than Africa, when in reality Africa is 14 times bigger. Northern continents like Europe and North America balloon to dominate the visual field, while the global South, including much of South America and Asia, shrinks in apparent significance. This was not a malicious act, but a calculated trade-off. The map's true power and its enduring danger lay in its incredible utility. It was so effective for its intended task that it became the standard classroom map for generations, its distorted image subconsciously equated with reality. For centuries, this projection subtly reinforced a colonial worldview, making the empires of the North seem vaster, more dominant, and more important than the tropical lands they often controlled. It was a cartographic lens that magnified the power of the colonizer and minimized the scale of the colonized, a bias embedded in the very lines used to teach children about their world. We still grapple with this legacy today, questioning how a 500-year-old navigational tool continues to shape our perception of global politics and power. Mercator gave us a world we could sail, but in doing so, he gave us a world that was fundamentally out of balance, a perfect guide for the fleets that would soon go forth to claim their disproportionate share of it. These charts were drawn for a single, ruthless purpose: to track the flow of silver and gold. The maps of the Spanish Main were not tools of discovery but instruments of theft, detailing the Caribbean world with a pirate's eye for opportunity. They showed the fortified ports of Havana and Cartagena where the treasure fleets gathered, the predictable routes of the annual floater, and the lonely coves where a privateer could lie in wait. The same winds that filled the sails of Spanish galleons heavy with New World bullion could also carry a sleek English raider like Francis Drake. For men like him, a detailed chart was more valuable than a chest of pieces of 8. It was the key to ambushing the world's richest convoy on the open sea. This was a maritime guerrilla war fought with latitude and longitude, where a single, well-placed sandbar marked on a map could mean the difference between a king's ransom and a watery grave. The power struggle was profoundly asymmetric. On one side stood the Spanish Empire, a bureaucratic colossus reliant on rigid schedules and official charts. On the other were the pirates and state-sanctioned privateers, agile predators who used their maps to exploit every weakness in the Spanish system. Henry Morgan's infamous sack of Panama in 1671 was a masterpiece of cartographic audacity, guided by maps that showed overland routes and undefended river approaches. Each successful raid, fueled by these stolen geographical secrets, slowly bled the Spanish treasury and pumped wealth into the coffers of rival nations, particularly England and France. The adventures these maps inspired are the very bedrock of pirate legend, tales of buried treasure and naval battles that continue to captivate us. Yet this era of chaotic plunder could not last forever. The same seas that hosted these freebooters would soon be crossed by a new kind of ship, one on a mission not for gold, but for knowledge, heralding a cartographic revolution driven by the precise measurement of the stars. The blank space on the American map was an invitation to a young nation. Following the monumental Louisiana Purchase, President Thomas Jefferson dispatched Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on a mission to fill that void, and the map they produced from their journals in 1814 became the blueprint for a continent. It was the first detailed American chart of the West, meticulously tracing the serpentine course of the Missouri River, revealing the formidable barrier of the Rocky Mountains, and most critically, sketching a viable route all the way to the Pacific. This was not merely a record of a journey, it was a declaration of intent. The map transformed an abstract acquisition of land into a tangible, traversable empire, its rivers and mountain passes suddenly appearing as highways for a nation poised to move west. For the United States government, the chart was a tool of sovereignty, a visual argument that this land was known, understood, and therefore owned. It provided the geographical intelligence needed to plan for roads, forts, and settlements, effectively opening the floodgates of expansion. Yet this powerful act of cartography came at a devastating cost. The very trails and riverways Lewis and Clark so carefully documented became the precise routes followed by waves of settlers, soldiers, and speculators. For the countless Native American nations who had called these lands home for millennia, the map was not a symbol of discovery, but a herald of dispossession. It directly ignited decades of conflict and forced removal as the mapped frontier became a battleground for control. The Lewis and Clark map embodies the potent and tragic idea of manifest destiny. the belief that a nation's divine right was to conquer the wilderness. It proved that exploration could be the engine of conquest, turning an unknown wilderness into a mapped frontier ripe for adventure, conflict, and a new national identity. This chart of continental ambition, grounded in hard-won reality, stands in stark contrast to a map that guided explorers toward a prize that never existed. A golden mirage shimmered just beyond the edge of the known world, beckoning men to their doom. For over 200 years, maps of El Dorado lured explorers deep into the sweltering heart of South America, charting a phantom. These were not maps of a place, but of a desire, tracing rivers that supposedly ran with gold dust and mountains that gleamed with precious gems. Conquistador Gonzalo Pizarro led hundreds of men into the Amazonian jungle, guided by such a promise. They found no city of gold, only starvation, disease, and a labyrinth of hostile waterways. Decades later, the English courtier Sir Walter Raleigh was similarly seduced, staking his fortune and his reputation on a map that claimed to reveal the location of Manoa, the Golden City. His expeditions ended in failure and eventual execution, a testament to the lethal power of a bad map. The true power struggle here was not between empires, but between human avarice and an indifferent continent. These charts, often drawn in European courts from the whispered tales of captured natives or rival adventurers, created a feedback loop of obsession. Each failure was explained away not as a flaw in the map, but as a navigational error, ensuring the next hopeful would try again. The maps of El Dorado delivered only hardship and ignited countless conflicts with indigenous peoples who were forced to guide or fight these desperate, gold-mad intruders. They represent the darkest potential of cartography, where a beautifully drawn lie can be more compelling than a brutal truth, leading not to adventure but to ruin. This chaotic search for a mirage would eventually give way to a very different kind of map, one that sought to impose order not through legend, but with a ruler and a pen, coldly dividing a continent into new nations. A continent was carved with a ruler, not with any understanding of its people. In the grand halls of Berlin in 1884, European diplomats gathered not to explore Africa, but to parcel it out. The Berlin Conference itself produced no single document, but its resolutions were immediately translated into a new generation of maps that imposed a brutal, geometric order upon the land. These charts were a cartographic fantasy, slicing through ancient kingdoms and ethnic homelands with straight lines and perfect arcs. A diplomat's pen could place a border through the center of a village, or split a single culture between 3 different European flags, all without anyone in the room ever having seen the soil they were dividing. This was the ultimate expression of colonial arrogance, reducing millions of people and their complex histories to mere colored territories on a page, their fates decided over coffee and cigars. The adventure for the European powers was one of unprecedented resource extraction, a race for rubber, ivory, and minerals that enriched foreign treasuries. But for the people living within those newly drawn lines, the map was a declaration of war. It created artificial nations, lumping rival groups together and dividing unified communities, a recipe for internal strife that would ignite conflicts for generations to come. This single act of cartographic imperialism did not just draw borders, it manufactured enduring power struggles, proving that a map could be a weapon of lasting subjugation. Yet from this imposed geography, a different kind of map would eventually emerge, one not of division, but of determined resistance. 2 surveyors spent 4 grueling years carving a line through the wilderness. Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon arrived from England in 1763 to settle a bitter property dispute between 2 of Britain's most powerful colonial families. the Pens of Pennsylvania and the Calverts of Maryland. Their task was purely technical, to mark the boundary with stone pillars every mile. The map they produced in 1768 was a masterpiece of precision, a testament to the scientific triumph of order over a wild and contested landscape. Yet this cartographic solution for an aristocratic squabble would soon become charged with a meaning the surveyors could never have foreseen. Within a few generations, their line was no longer just about property, it was about people. It morphed into the Mason-Dixon Line, the stark cultural and political border separating the free North from the slaveholding South. A map created to end one conflict now gave a chillingly clear shape to the nation's next great power struggle. Where once there were only abstract arguments over states' rights and the morality of slavery, there was now a tangible divide. The line made the concept of sectionalism terrifyingly real, a fissure in the national psyche that you could, in theory, stand upon. It became a powerful symbol in the mouths of politicians and abolitionists, a rhetorical weapon that divided speeches, newspapers, and ultimately, a country. The map's power was not in its original purpose, but in the terrible new identity it acquired, transforming a surveyor's chart into a premonition of war. This line of conflict, drawn in stone and ink, set the stage for a very different kind of map, one that would not divide a nation, but would instead drive thousands to rush headlong into an unknown territory, chasing a dream of instant wealth. A single sketch in the dirt was all it took to change a continent's destiny. John Sutter never intended to draw a map that would lure the world, but his rough diagrams of a sawmill being built on the American River in California became the most powerful treasure charts of their age. In January 1848, his carpenter, James Marshall, spotted flecks of gold in the mill's tailrace. The news traveled slowly at first, carried in letters and merchants' gossip, but once it reached the newspapers, the explosion was instantaneous. Editors, desperate to convey the location of this newfound wealth, published crude, often wildly inaccurate maps alongside the reports. These simple drawings in penny papers were more compelling than any official chart, transforming abstract rumor into a tangible destination. They promised a man could simply arrive, bend down, and pick up a fortune from the riverbed. The power struggle was no longer between empires, but between hundreds of thousands of individuals, all armed with the same hopeful scrap of newsprint, all racing for the same handful of gullies. They were the 49ers, a tidal wave of humanity surging from every corner of the globe. They came by ship, by wagon, and on foot, their journeys guided by maps that were little more than cartoons of a promised land. What did they find when they arrived? Not a landscape of easy wealth, but a chaotic, brutal scramble where the real money was often made not by the prospector, but by the merchant selling him a shovel. The maps had delivered them to the adventure, but the reality was backbreaking labor, disease, and lawless claim jumping. Yet their collective frenzy, ignited by those crude sketches, utterly transformed California. Almost overnight, a sparsely populated Mexican territory became a booming American state, its economy and infrastructure forged in the white-hot fire of a gold rush. This was the raw power of a map to mobilize human hope on an epic scale, a stark contrast to the next great cartographic quest, which would trade the sun-scorched riverbeds of California for the silent, ship-crushing expanse of the Arctic ice. For 300 years, the Arctic remained a blank space on the map that Europe was desperate to fill. The dream of a Northwest Passage lured generations of sailors into a frozen labyrinth, and the charts they left behind are tragic records of hope, hubris, and human endurance. Each expedition added new, often desperate details, a jagged coastline here, a dead end strait there, all sketched onto parchment as ships were slowly crushed by the ice. Martin Frobisher's maps from the 1570s confidently marked a waterway he named Frobisher Strait, a route that later explorers would prove was only a bay, a cartographic dead end born from his desperate desire to find gold and a passage simultaneously. The power struggle here was not between nations, but between human ambition and an utterly indifferent environment. This was an adventure measured in frostbitten limbs and scurvy-ridden crews, where a single successful sounding could mean the difference between a knighthood and a frozen grave. The British Royal Navy, at the peak of its confidence, threw its greatest resources and most celebrated officers into this frigid quest, believing that mastering this route was the final step to total control of global trade. The maps produced by these naval expeditions, like those from Sir John Franklin's doomed voyage in 1845, were masterpieces of precision for the territories they actually surveyed. Yet they also highlighted the vast, terrifying unknowns, the spaces still marked as unexplored where ships and their entire crews could simply vanish. Franklin's two ships, the Erebus and Terror, disappeared with all 129 men, becoming the most haunting legend of the search. Their fate, pieced together through Inuit testimony and modern archaeology, proved that the Arctic would not be conquered by sheer naval prestige alone. The eventual mapping of a complete passage was a bittersweet cartographic victory, a route so choked with ice for most of the year that it remained commercially useless for decades. Today, as climate change melts the ice that defeated so many, the Northwest Passage is becoming a navigable reality, a transformation that carries its own heavy irony. The very environment that explorers fought so hard to overcome is now retreating, finally granting access through a tragedy they could never have foreseen. This long struggle to map the Earth's final frontiers now gives way to a new kind of chart, one that sought not to divide land or sea, but to conquer the air itself. A British lawyer who had never visited India was given 5 weeks to draw its future. Cyril Radcliffe arrived in New Delhi in July 1947, tasked with a near-impossible cartographic surgery to partition the vast subcontinent of British India into 2 new nations, India and Pakistan. Working in secret with outdated maps and census reports, Radcliffe and his committee drew a line over 1,600 miles long, a border that would slice through farms, villages, and the very heart of communities. The Radcliffe Line was a cartographic creation born from the frantic haste of decolonization, a theoretical solution to an intensely human problem. Its power was immediate and catastrophic. When the map was published just 2 days after independence, it unleashed a human tidal wave. Millions of people found their homes and lives suddenly on the wrong side of an invisible, brand-new border. What followed was one of the largest, most violent mass migrations in history, as Hindus and Sikhs fled toward India and Muslims toward Pakistan, all caught in a vortex of communal violence. The map did not just draw a line, it drew a line in blood, sparking a conflagration that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and left a legacy of trauma that endures for generations. But the map's devastating work was not finished. In the remote northern reaches of the partition line, Radcliffe's pen created a time bomb, the disputed territory of Kashmir. His ambiguous awarding of this Muslim-majority region to India ignited the First Indo-Pakistani War within months and locked the 2 nations into a permanent, nuclear-armed power struggle. The Radcliffe Line stands as one of history's most chilling examples of a map's destructive potential, a stark lesson in how lines drawn in distant rooms with little knowledge and less foresight can fracture the world for centuries. This partition of a subcontinent by decree set the stage for a new kind of global division, one that would be mapped not on land, but across the very brink of annihilation. A map can shrink a continent without moving a single mountain. That was the revolutionary insight behind the Peters projection, unveiled in 1973 by German historian Arno Peters. He launched a direct assault on the Mercator map that had dominated classrooms for 4 centuries, arguing its distortion was not just a navigational necessity but a profound political act. Peters designed his map with one radical goal: to represent the true relative sizes of all landmasses. In his projection, Africa balloons to its rightful scale, 14 times larger than Greenland, while Europe is dramatically resized, no longer visually dominating the global south. This was cartography as a moral crusade. The map was quickly adopted by UNESCO and major aid agencies, who saw it as a tool for global justice, a way to visually correct a historical imbalance that had subtly taught generations that some countries and continents were simply more important than others. The power struggle it ignited was not over territory, but over truth itself, pitting traditional cartographers who prioritized nautical angles against a new wave of social geographers who asked who a map is truly for. The debate was fierce. Critics argued the Peters projection distorted shapes to an unrecognizable degree, turning landmasses into stretched, strange forms to achieve its aerial accuracy. Yet its greatest impact was undeniable. It forced the world to confront the uncomfortable politics of representation. It asked a simple, devastating question: why does the map we use to teach our children about the world systematically minimize the size of developing nations? The Peters projection proved that no map is ever truly neutral. Every projection is a choice about what to prioritize and, by extension, what to marginalize. This modern challenge to 500 years of convention reminds us that the stories maps tell are never finished, setting the stage for a final epic map that turns its gaze not to the past, but to the uncharted territory of tomorrow. A single click can now bring the entire planet to your screen. This is the world of Google Earth and its digital kin, a revolution that began in 2005 and has fundamentally changed our relationship with maps. We have moved from parchment to pixels, from guarded state secrets in royal treasuries to a global database accessible to anyone with an internet connection. This is the most profound shift in cartography since the Age of Discovery, but it has not ended the epic struggles for power. It has simply moved them to a new frontier. The same satellite imagery that lets you explore the streets of a foreign city from your living room is also used by militaries for targeting and by governments for mass surveillance. The power to see everything, everywhere, has created a new battleground over data privacy and the ethics of observation, raising a chilling question: who gets to watch the watchers? Yet this digital landscape has also unleashed a new age of adventure and discovery. Amateur archaeologists scanning the deserts of Peru from their laptops have identified potential Nazca lines and unknown archaeological sites. Humanitarian organizations use these platforms in real time to coordinate disaster relief after earthquakes and floods, saving countless lives by mapping destruction and directing aid. The power to chart the world has been decisively transferred from the hands of kings and admirals into the hands of individuals, but this democratization has a paradox at its core. While we all hold the map, a few powerful corporations now control the digital landscape it resides on. They decide what we see, what is blurred, and how our own movements through the real world are tracked, collected, and sold. The epic story of maps is clearly not a relic of the past. It is a living, breathing narrative of struggle and adventure now playing out across the digital globe, proving that the power of a map is limited only by the imagination of the person who holds it. From the cryptic coastlines of the Piri Reis map to the digital globe of Google Earth, We have journeyed across centuries of cartographic intrigue. These 27 epic maps were never just guides. They were instruments of empire, sparks for conflict, and blueprints for adventure that shaped the world we live in today. Each parchment and every pixel tells a deeper story of human ambition, a relentless drive for gold, for glory, for God, or simply for the knowledge of what lies beyond the horizon. They remind us that the power to map the world is, and has always been, the power to shape its destiny. History is not only written in books, it is drawn on these canvases of vellum and light, influencing the rise and fall of nations and the lives of millions. The next time you glance at a map on your screen or unfold a paper chart, pause for a moment. Remember that you are not just looking at lines and labels, you are holding a story, a hidden history of struggle and discovery waiting to be read. If these tales of cartographic power have captivated you, subscribe for more journeys into history's greatest mysteries. We would love to hear which of these 27 maps resonated most with you, so share your favorite in the comments below.